welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. This is episode 216. I'm your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your co-host, Mike.
A few thanks to go out, first of all, to saxophonist Mäkelä for writing to us after last week's episode and sharing our episode as well. We featured his recording Doors on Red Records, and we really enjoyed that. Some great sax playing, great Italian jazz that we always enjoy on the podcast, puts us in a good mood. So be sure to give that a listen if you haven't heard it.
Yeah, Italian jazz is pretty great. I don't know. They got it going on there.
Last episode, we had a few departures from the music world in classical and jazz, but this week it was pop music, Mike.
Yeah, and pop music giants, too.
Right.
Yeah, we lost, of course, everybody knows this because it was all over the news, Sly Stone earlier in the week. And then the next day, Brian Wilson, the driving force in the Beach Boys back in the day. One of the really great American songwriters of the 20th century ever, really.
Absolutely. I saw an article about that, and it said, I don't know if it's true or not, but he got an F in music class in school.
Well, things happen. You know, I think Einstein kind of failed out of a class or something like that, or failed a science class, and then, I don't know.
I would believe it. He had his whole original concept to musical harmony.
Right.
Really quite a unique mind there.
Yeah, somebody had mentioned that, he was like Beethoven or something like that, but I think he's more like Stravinsky in that he was kind of had a strange ear and could put these harmonies together in a very specific way that really, like, no one else did or probably will. He had a really unique sound.
That's true. I've enjoyed analyzing Beach Boys tunes for a while and noticing how they move through interesting harmonies. Very creative stuff.
Right.
Well, Mike, it's not all bad news this week. We do actually have something to celebrate.
All right. And I know what that is, but why don't you start the celebration?
We want to wish Michael's brother, Richard, a very happy birthday this week.
Right. And we chose the appropriate music played by an instrument that I really think he should like a lot more.
Yeah, we heard that Richard's favorite instrument is the accordion.
Yeah, he's complained about it often.
So not only do we have this theme here today, but we're going to have some accordion in the program just for you, Richard.
Yeah, and this hopping kind of rhythm is Italian.
Yes, this is the Italian version of the Happy Birthday theme as recorded by Los Angeles accordionist Al DiCicco from his traditional and holiday songs on the accordion recording. You get the Italian version, the klezmer style, Latin style, Polish style, Scottish, and regular traditional Happy Birthday. But we picked the Italian version for Richard.
All right. I got to tell you, though, if there are all those different versions of the same tune on that album, I think that would be a really rough listen all the way through. I think you want to select those tracks. And Al DiCicco sounds like a paisan. He sounds Italian to me.
Yeah, it sounds like it to me, too. And Richard, of course, is the owner of Fast Signs of Staten Island, the company that designed our glowing neon logo and gave us a lifetime supply of business cards as well.
Yeah, only because we're never going to meet that many people. So, happy birthday, Richard.
All right, we'll get into this week's program of 6 exciting recordings, and in the episode description, as always, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all of the recordings that we're going to discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. Now, if you can't see, the full description or the recording list and links are hard to access wherever you're listening to us now. You can always come over and check us out on our host site, Podbean, podbean.com, where everything is easy to follow. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe and tell a music-loving friend as well. If you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the music category recommendations on the podcasting services, and that helps us grow our audience. Also, come follow us on our Facebook page as well to get extra info and more new releases throughout the week. You can leave a message or comment there as well. Check us out over on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. We're there at Adult Music Pod. Put up the episodes there every week as well. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We'll be playing music samples throughout our discussion, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. All right, we're ready to jump into the program, Mike. We've got a couple unique instruments in this evening's music.
We do, and I'm really kind of happy about that because we like to get off the beaten path a little bit.
Absolutely.
Although we're going to go right directly on the beaten path for the second album, but need a little variety here. So the first album we're going to talk about from the Baroque era is by a composer whose name I only heard for the first time last year. His name is Sylvius Leopold Weiss. And I only heard his name last year when a double album of his lute music was released by Evangelina Mascardi on the Arcana label. And I didn't put it on the podcast because it's a double album and it's a little too much lute for one program. But now this year we have an album by Bernhard Hofstötter called Fireworks for Lute. I don't really think you think about fireworks and lute.
Not in the same sentence, no.
At the same time or in the same sentence, yeah. But we have that here, and this is on the Christophorus label, a label who I tried to get in touch with a lot, but they're apparently based in Heidelberg, and there's another company that has the same name.
Oh, boy.
Located in Hamburg, and I don't think they're a music company. And when I finally got in touch with the one in Heidelberg, they didn't answer. So I don't know what's going on. We're going to do your album anyway. I actually bought this CD because I couldn't get the booklet notes, and I wanted to hear it anyway because I have the Mascardi album too. So I wanted to hear this take on Weiss's music. Fireworks? Hey, I'm all over it. I love fireworks, and I like the lute too. So
yeah, light the fuse and let's get going.
Okay, who is this guy? Sylvius Leopold Weiss was the most renowned lutist of the early 18th century. So why haven't we ever heard of him? That's the funny thing about classical music. You know, a lot of the composers, the great performers of the past just fall away, and just, you know, one or two got into the repertoire by the time we were born. That's what had happened. They kind of narrowed it down to just very few works, and now the catalog's expanding again. Anyway, Weiss left behind an extensive body of work comprising over 600 compositions for and with lute. Not lute, although that would be the proper way to say it. I'm choosing lute. I just want to satisfy the British listeners out there because they're going to be saying, oh, lute. Anyway, his music is not only marked by extraordinary virtuosity, but above all, by its depth and refinement. Oh, yes, we are going to hear depth and refinement on this podcast tonight. He was probably born in Grotkow, Silesia in 1687, and that means he was an exact contemporary of Johann Sebastian Bach. They were both from the same generation, born 2 years apart. Silesia is a historical region that lies mostly in Poland, with small parts in the Czech Republic and Germany, so you can picture that. Weiss was a child prodigy. He worked mostly in Dresden after stints in Rome and Innsbruck. He had a bit of a temper, apparently. It's reported that in 1722, a confrontation with a violinist escalated to the point where the violinist bit into Weiss's right thumb. Ouch. I really like the precision of that description. Yeah. It sounds to me like the violinist had the issue there. I mean, Weiss didn't bite the violinist, so I don't know what's going on. And in 1738, many years later, to be fair, he was briefly imprisoned following a dispute with the director of chapel and chamber music at the Saxon Elector's court in Dresden. This doesn't sound so damning to me. He sounds like just a person who just lost his cool once or twice.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know. He might have been a chilled out guy for the rest of the time. Anyway, as for Weiss's playing, we can only speculate about it, of course. All we have are accounts from those who heard him. Louise Adelgunde Victoria Gottsched, who heard him in Leipzig in 1740, wrote, "His touch was incredibly delicate. One could hear him without knowing where the notes came from." And I've had that experience before with music. His improvisation was unmatched, and he had complete command over dynamics, from the softest piano to the most powerful forte. In short, he was the master of his instrument and could do anything he wished with it. And that's what we all hope for when we learn to play an instrument. So he was a master lutenist. All right, let's get into the music itself. Now, obviously, we're not going to hear this music coming from somewhere that we don't know where it is. I mean, we have modern players on modern equipment, so the microphone's right in front of them. Anyway, track 1 on this Hofstötter album is Capriccio in G major. This piece was anonymously composed, but may be by Weiss. Here we go again, okay? It sounds a lot like Bach's famous E major prelude BWV 1006A, and Hofstötter's playing is admirably smooth here. He's given quite a lot of room sound, and as a result, the instrument comes up sounding full-toned and slick. Now keep in mind when you hear this is not the Bach piece that you're familiar with, but one believed to be by Valse, maybe just kind of taking Bach's theme and bringing it somewhere else. Anyway, let's hear it. Hofstötter's playing's got a nice bounce in its step. It's a really cheerful composition and performance. Excellent clear technique as well. Okay, tracks 2 through 7, Sonata number 42 in A minor. This work showcases Valse at the height of his compositional and technical mastery, and is the work that inspired Bernhard Hofstötter to give this album its title, Fireworks for Lute. He explains, Valse's virtuoso compositions sparkle and flash like fireworks before they give way to silence again.
Huh.
Let's hear some of those. Well, the first one I don't have a sample of. This is the Allemande, track 2. Hofstötter takes a slowish tempo here, articulating clearly and getting a lot of emotion into the piece. He makes the line sound insistent, like it's demanding to be heard. Again, more fluid passages come across beautifully, played with well-balanced legato. Track 3, Allegro, this is the second movement. This movement really moves. Hofstötter injecting some serious energy into the melodic line and figuration. All right. Yeah, really moving there.
Yeah, there are a lot of lines moving in different directions in the parts that are fun to follow there.
Yeah, not only that, there's a bit of aggression in that piece, too. It's really pushing forward. And I have to say, I'm pretty mesmerized by the playing. He plays with strength on the attack so that you can hear the response of the string vibrating the instrument. Like you can hear the whole response of the wood kind of creaking as well. Very close recording. This is a pretty long movement at 5 minutes and 32 seconds, but the momentum never flags. Track 4, Bourrée, which is a dance. I like the earnestness with which this movement is played. It's more sung than danced. You know, Bourrée is a dance movement, but this one sounds more song-like in the way that Hofstötter plays it. It's got a pushing and pulling on the melody that a vocalist would do. Let's hear a sample of this. Boy, he just doesn't let that cadence come. Does Valse, just keeps going. You could hear the dance rhythm in that, but Hofstötter chooses to accentuate the melody here. Track 5, Sarabande. These are always really haunting movements. The stately Sarabande is on the faster side here and again has its melody delivered in an appealing song-like way. Hofstötter is really concerned with keeping up the momentum of the piece and doesn't do much lingering here, a quality that the saraband really invites. Let's hear a sample of this. Can't get to a cadence. He just keeps extending the line. Hofstötter draws out the proportions of the piece, and the listener gets a sense of the bigger structure in the performance. I think because it's a little faster than a saraband would normally go. Track 6, Menuet. The menuet has figuration that moves quickly, as in the allegro above, the melodic material emerging out of the figuration's wave-like proceeding and then receding quality, achieved by subtle crescendos and decrescendos. Listen to that one yourself, because I think it's important to hear the whole movement to get that structure. And finally, track 7, the final movement of this sonata, Giga Presto. Even quicker than the menuet, this has rapid figuration with rippling melodic material emerging from it. All right, we got to a cadence that time, but he did avoid it a few times too. All right, and that's the end of that sonata. Now, did we get a sense of the fireworks? Think about other lute recordings you've heard. You don't really hear lute playing this aggressive. You hear guitar playing that's like this. The lute tends to be a mellower instrument, but this really does feel like it's pushing into the guitar era a bit. I wonder how many other people composed and played the lute like this back in the Baroque era. Judging by recordings I've heard, not many, if any. I think of the lute as a pretty mellow instrument in general. Track 8, Saraband in E minor. This is a standalone piece. It's full of unexpected twists and experimental structure, so get your intellectual ear going here. This starts out with a weird harmonic progression, very much at a minor key, but it twists downward in an odd way. Hofstötter has a way of drawing out the melody and even making these weird harmonies appealing and even easy to follow. There's a satisfying cadence of 56 seconds after some odd twists to the melody, which I really can't give you in a sample. You'd have to hear the piece from the beginning, because the effect sort of builds up. Hofstötter gives the melody a strong attack, such that you can hear the quality of the strings he's using. I'm going to try a sample from 1 minute and 50 seconds in to get a sense of the harmonic excursions that this piece goes into. Listen to this. It's like every time you hear a new bass note play, there's a new surprise, and I don't really know where to come out there because it's kind of interesting. It's a really interesting piece throughout, really, as far as the harmony goes. Tracks 9 through 14, this is the last work on the album, Sonata number 44 in A major. This work exists in several slightly different versions. The performance here is based on the manuscript MS2B2 from the former Dolmetsch Library. That is a nod to you scholars out there. I have no idea where I'd find that score or what the other scores are like, or even where they are. Anyway, track 9, Allemande. This is the first movement. It's taken amiably at an appropriately slow, stately tempo. Let's hear the beginning. Okay, very traditional approach there with the full cadence coming after the melody. The piece is fairly short with 2 sections that are pretty straightforward, especially after the previous sarabande. It serves to recenter our ears because we had a sarabandic adventure, if you will, in the previous track. This is pretty straightforward here. I liked the way the B section began in this particular movement with some harmonic blurring, already reorganizing the balance toward the home key. It gets there pretty quickly, and the section repeats with some embellishment from Hofstötter. Track 10, Courante. This is a lively courante, and it's pretty short at 1 minute and 35 seconds. Its rising figures at the beginning are rather catchy. Track 11, Bourrée. This Bourrée has a lot more of the dance character we'd expect from such a piece, and is even briefer than the previous movement at 53 seconds, so I'll send you to sample this in its entirety on your own. It's played with some ebullience here. Track 12, Sarabande, the third sarabande we've heard on the album. This is also brief for a sarabande, clocking in at 2 minutes and 37 seconds. They usually go into the 5-minute range or more. So in a way, this can be thought of as a sort of short sonata, this entire sonata work. These movements are pretty short. There's appealing material throughout the sonata, including in this sarabande. Hofstötter again accentuates the melody and gives the piece some speed so the line holds together in a more legato way, without the notes decaying too quickly. Let's hear it. Sad, contemplative, really beautiful. Track 13, Menuet. The Menuet is more stately than the one in the previous sonata, but still has considerable energy to it, injected by Hofstötter's accents at the beginning of phrases and by Valses having a chord there too. Let's hear the opening. You know, we heard the theme twice because it's pretty short. The approach to the cadence has an appealing rippling line in the high end of the instrument and features some impressive plucking fingerwork. The final movement, track 14, is a gigue, and it's played in a leisurely triplet rhythm. I really enjoy this rhythm. It just makes me feel good. Let's feel good together. It's a comfortable tempo, and its catchiness is evident from the start. The momentum is built into the movement, and Hofstötter draws out the dance rhythm appealingly. And that's the end of the album. It's pretty short at 46 minutes, really. Valse's music is indeed virtuosic. I'm really not used to hearing the lute played as though it's a guitar, and always thought the slower compositions it usually gets were due to the action of the instrument. But I guess I was wrong. So again, learned something new.
Yeah.
Learned a lot of new things. Because Sylvius Leopold Valse was a name I had never heard before either, until last year. Hofstötter says he names the album Fireworks for Lute after the first sonata we hear on the album, but to my ear, the fireworks on this album come from Hofstötter's playing, more than from the music, although it's embodied in the music too. He's got a smooth technique with brilliant articulation and balance. The music, as Mozart said, flows like oil, momentum sounding unstoppable once Hofstötter starts playing. He's also got a great sense of melody, shaping the melodic lines appealingly, and giving them a vocalist's loosening and tightening to heighten emotion in the more melodic movements. This album shed new light for me on the lute and on Valse's music itself, which I only became familiar with last year, as I mentioned, due to Evangelina Mascardi's much longer album of Valse's lute music on the Arcana label, which is where you should go next after hearing this album, if you like it. That album is less excitingly called Selected Works for Lute, but those works are no less exciting, and I'd say that if you like Hofstötter's album, you might want to go and hear that one too.
This is pleasant and often densely rhythmic on the surface, but there's a lot going on in the bass and middle voices in Valse's compositions. There are extended running lines that are continually developed and turned over, as you pointed out, all the avoided cadences as it moves on.
He's very clever at that.
And that keeps it moving forward and having a real momentum to it. Interesting harmonic changes and twists keep you engaged in Valse's compositions as well. And Hofstötter's playing has a lot of subtlety in bringing out all of the voices, and his lute's tone is charming, the recording being captured with a lot of room sound that adds to the ambiance. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. It's a good one for the lute. It's not really a late-night lute album like one I have that's actually called Late Night Lute.
Yeah, this is more of a morning lute, I would think. Get the blood pumping.
Yeah, it's a coffee lute. Lute accompaniment to your coffee. Our next album is by the composer Hector Berlioz in one of the most famous pieces in the repertoire, Symphonie Fantastique. And on this album, there's also Ravel's La Valse, which actually fits in pretty well in this program. This is performed by the Orchestre de Paris, conducted by Klaus Mäkelä, Finnish conductor. He's very young and is making a big splash, and now has a number of really impressive recordings behind him.
He's 27?
Yeah, he's 27 now.
Uh-huh.
We actually heard him on his debut album of all 7 Sibelius symphonies, which we rather insanely went through when we first heard it. And what naive and happy days those were, huh? When we just would listen to entire 4-disc albums.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking, this is just okay. But I actually gave that one a listen again, like just after hearing this, and it started to grow on me a lot more. It's still not my favorite Sibelius run-through, but he's impressive on that as well. This is what happens. You reassess your judgments after hearing albums, over and over again. Anyway, this is on the Decca label, and it was released on May 30th. Now, the notes say that Mäkelä here has invested his reading of the Symphonie Fantastique with such striking originality. I love it when the author says this about an album that he's been paid to write for. Drawn-out silences, bold contrasts underlining Berlioz's oppositions of nuance and timbre, deep rumblings in the bass, a general celebration of orchestral sound, extraordinary explosions of color and light. And I have to tell you, that's a pretty accurate description of what we're going to hear. Symphonie Fantastique came to be because Berlioz became obsessed with the Irish actress Harriet Smithson, who he wrote all these crazy letters to. And then he wrote this piece, and then he later married her somehow after all this lunacy.
Quite a story, yeah.
It's quite a story, and it goes on from there, too. He wrote this work thinking of her as the idealized woman in the piece. She's not so idealized in the last movement. Today, he'd be locked away for such insane passion, but this is the Romantic era, and insane people were the flavor of the day. And he created one of the great orchestra works of the 19th century, and really of all time. By the way, I just want to mention, if you ever read a single biography of a composer, read Berlioz's autobiography. It's a fantastic read. He's absolutely crazy. It starts out with where he describes his birth, which he apparently remembers. Anyway, and it goes on to talk about his marriage to Harriet Smithson, and he realized she was an alcoholic, and he became physically afraid of her. But they stayed married until I think she finally died, and then he remarried, and then had predictable problems with his second wife as well. Anyway, it's a great read. I highly recommend it. It's like a novel. I mean, he's the kind of person that you love to read about in a book, and you're really happy that you don't know in person, unless you can keep a distance and sort of observe them. Anyway, let's get into the piece and the performance here. Movement 1, track 1, Rêverie, Passion. So it's a two-part movement. The Rêverie give a musical description of the artist before he discovers his love. And then we hear the idée fixe. Now, the idée fixe kind of acts as a stand-in for, it's a musical sort of figure of the idealized love that the artist loves. So it's really Harriet Smithson, but that's not explicitly mentioned in the piece. So the Reverie is melancholy, the consummate romantic era mood, and right away I'm noticing Mäkelä's sensitivity with the score. His pacing is very deliberate. He leaves some long pauses between phrases, really making the effort to draw out all of the emotion and let us kind of sit with it when it's finished. And there's a lot of it in this piece, too. There's a lot of emotion. Sound quality is rich, especially in the bass. So if you have a subwoofer, you're going to really love this. At 1 minute and 40 seconds, a sprightly theme comes in, perhaps a reverie of a happier circumstance. The reverie section goes through quite a lot of moods, but you always notice the anxious ones. The idée fixe is heard, and the passions section begins. I'm going to sample the idée fixe. This is at the 5 minute and 40 second mark. It's important to know this because you're going to hear this over and over again in this piece. Now, it's not an easy theme to remember. It's very long, first of all, but you're going to hear it all over this piece, and it's kind of important to know because it's key to the entire work as it's heard in all 5 movements. And every time you hear it, the mood it's played with indicates the artist's attitude towards his beloved. The music is far more energetic after the theme is introduced, as you heard at the end, and the ending is especially huge and excitingly executed here by the Orchestre de Paris, Mäkelä driving the rhythm with panache. At the very end, we hear the idée fixe played tenderly one more time. Track 2 is the second movement, en bal, or a dance. The artist is taken to a party, so we imagine he goes there to escape his fixation. This is a pretty modern day sort of sentiment. You know, you're all mooning about this girl you just met, and your friends are like, hey, snap out of it. You know, let's go out and just go drinking or something, all right? So that's what he does here, the 19th century equivalent of that. But he senses her, or maybe even sees her everywhere at the ball, as is indicated by the presence of the idée fixe woven into the waltz rhythm. There's some gorgeous use of the harp at the very beginning of this movement as energy picks up. The way the waltz comes together is a bit of a precursor to Ravel's La Valse, which is cleverly included on this album. The waltz rhythm starts swirling with some nicely orchestrated harp and wind interjections. The strings drive the main waltz, and at 2 minutes and 10 seconds the waltz fades and the idée fixe is heard. It starts taking on the waltz rhythm. So our poor artist is smitten again. And as you can hear, Klaus Mäkelä knows his way around a waltz. This sounds really fantastic, and that thrumming like bass too just sounds fantastic on the recording. The mood is beautifully caught here, and the sudden change of mood into the idée fixe is palpable. The waltz actually starts taking on an anxious quality, a magic trick performed by increasing the dynamic and giving it a slight push of tempo. The clarity of the various levels of string lines is really amazing. Here, too, Mäkelä gives the movement an exciting build-up to the end. Track 3, Scène au Champ. Well, the artist still trying to get his head straight. Goes into the woods the way Beethoven used to. So he starts dreaming about his beloved, and then, of course, by the end, he's fretting about her. Ah, those romantic people. At first, he reflects calmly. At the beginning, we hear an English horn answered by a distant oboe. They represent two shepherds, perhaps a man and a woman, calling to each other across the mountains. Let's hear the opening of this movement. Ah, love. I want to mention that I've heard this movement played at much slower tempos than this, but Mäkelä's tempo gives it a welcome energy. There's a big sense of momentum in the movement, even in the peaceful horn calls at the beginning. After this, we get the artist's contemplative mood in the countryside, inspired as he is by nature, as all romantic composers were, or artists of the era. Of course, his beloved comes to mind, and we hear the idée fixe. The entire opening of the movement is peaceful, but after the 7th minute, the music gets more agitated, and there's a huge chord with a timpani roll at the 8-minute and 40-second mark. In the 10th minute, there's an exquisitely played quiet passage for what I believe is the clarinet. At 12 minutes and 30 seconds, the English horn and oboe return, and we hear distant timpani thunder as well. There's more contemplation after this, and at the 14-minute and 25-second mark, there's a resolution, and then the English horn plays solo, and we hear distant timpani representing thunder, but there's no answer from the oboe. Oh, it gives us an ominous feeling and leaves the artist distraught, which we sense from the sustaining note from the wind instrument as the strings gently resolve. Yeah, this guy has lost his response of his love, and now he's thinking, oh, what if that happens to me? And we go on. Well, the dance didn't work, the woods didn't work, so now we're in movement 4, Marche au supplice, or the march to the scaffold. It's quite a jump from the woods. So he's in anguish still, and now he tries drugs. Oh, man. So he takes opium, which makes him hallucinate that he has killed his beloved and is now condemned to death. A march accompanies his procession to the guillotine. This very famous movement begins with the drums beating out the funeral march rhythm. It's sort of a precursor of early 20th century Russian expressions of irony in works by Prokofiev and Shostakovich. This is way ahead of its time. Berlioz's reach was long. Brass is pretty fantastic in this movement, and the brass section produces a raucous, edgy sound when we hear them. A celebratory fanfare-like theme comes out at the minute and 35-second mark. This is where the condemned is before the crowd, and they're all kind of excited that they're going to see a beheading. Let's hear this. Fantastic brass playing there. And listen to the way Mäkelä makes sure that you hear that low, sort of raucous toned tuba, I guess that is, at the in the right channel. It's kind of like low down in the right channel. You can hear it. He really draws that out. The timpani registers strongly too here. There's some great orchestration and use of timbre from the individual instruments in this movement, and you should hear it in full. Dynamics are full and dramatic in this movement, and again, the recording captures it well. Another tension-building crescendo leads to the fantastic ending, sounding absolutely theatrical here. Mäkelä has a really good sense of drama, I've noticed, not only from this performance either. The music suddenly quietens as a clarinet, I think, plays the idée fixe solo one last time, and then a huge chord indicates the fall of the guillotine. You actually hear the head falling into the basket via the bouncing notes that follow. It's fantastic, and Mäkelä has a real flair for the drama of the work. Let's sample the ending. So listen to the guillotine falling, the head bouncing, and then the final celebration at seeing this happen. I think this used to thrill crowds, believe it or not. Boy, I wouldn't want to be president one of these. Anyway, let's hear this. Now, if you ask me, that makes a suitable ending to the work, right? The artist is dead. But there's a fifth movement called Songe d'une nuit de sabbat. So, a dream of a witch's Sabbath. The artist becomes embroiled with his muse in the orgy of a witch's Sabbath as the opium-induced hallucination continues. Now when we hear the idée fixe, it's ugly as the beloved is portrayed as a grotesque, vice-infested witch. Remember that Berlioz wound up marrying Harriet Smithson, who apparently knew this work. And you gotta wonder what woman would be flattered to be portrayed in the way we're gonna hear in this movement. It reminds me of the ugly way Picasso would portray his wife, Olga Koklova, after their relationship broke down. Again, Berlioz is way ahead in his ideas. This very Halloween-like movement comes in with gusts of wind-like tone from the low bass, creating a creepy atmosphere. Orchestre de Paris characterized this movement with drama again, and once again I'm caught off guard by Mäkelä's intense sense of drama. I imagine he'll be a great conductor of opera in the future. At 1 minute and 26 seconds, a spooky dance starts, and I'm going to sample that. This is a really tight performance from the orchestra. Mäkelä really has them, and every dynamic under control. And it's also very clear-edged, the way the tone just sort of veers off. It's just fantastic. So listen to the orchestration here as well as the clarity it gets in this performance. Church bells at 2 minutes and 55 seconds indicate that it's midnight and the witch's Sabbath is to begin. Then the tuba plays the Dies Irae, which you know from the theme we play when we announce someone's death on the podcast. It's always an indicator of death, and here I'd guess that would be the death of the artist. It was used often in Romantic era evocations of death. Great deep bass sounds from the orchestra and recording here. Let's hear a little bit of that. Well, of course, the piece and this particular performance of this work is riveting, and I just don't want to come away from it. Okay, so you heard the Dies Irae theme in that sample, and again, this recording wins big on clarity of sound, as there are once again many layers of orchestration that all come across clearly. At 7 minutes and 10 seconds, Berlioz uses an early example of sul ponticello for a hollow effect on the strings. This became standard in the 20th century. At 8 minutes and 34 seconds, there's a fantastic bony effect made by the violins hitting the strings with their bows. Again, another new effect at the time. No one before Berlioz would have thought to do that, because you had to be, long-lined and elegant. This piece is very vulgar, especially for its time. That section is followed by a huge, fantastic, and frequency-saturated approach to the big final chord. We have to hear how this ends, so let's sample the ending of this work.
You think it can't build up anymore, but it does.
Yeah, the audience is on its feet there. By the way, if you teach about music, this is a fantastic piece to use in a class of young people. They really are drawn to the whole theme of the work. It's just so crazy and so dramatic and really out there. All right, so in the second movement, we heard a waltz, and as a result, Mäkelä pairs Ravel's La Valse on this recording as the encore piece, I guess you can call it. Now, Ravel imagined his waltz as being written in Berlioz's time, so it fits well. It does sound like the second movement of Symphonie Fantastique may have been a reference point for this work, but it really could have been anything at this point. There were all those Strauss waltzes and so much more. It starts in the low strings with just a pounding rhythm. The waltz slowly evolves from random sounds. It almost, to me, I interpret this as sort of like civilization being built up from the muck. So, you have that sort of primordial thing that's sort of the foundation, and then you build up this kind of nicer thing on top of it, but you're really building on something, sort of unsavory, I guess. Mäkelä gives this piece good momentum. He conducts at pretty fast tempos, and it gives the work enormous energy and momentum. Timbres stand out, especially when we hear the lower, reedier end of wind instruments. Mäkelä draws these sounds out against the waltz rhythm backdrop. Ravel, of course, was one of the greatest orchestrators to ever live, and Mäkelä seems to know just how to make the most of the sound Ravel conjured in his scores. Let's hear some of the wind orchestration. You'll also notice the fantastic dynamics captured on the recording by those orchestral outbursts punctuated by timpani. There's also some dramatic teasing with the tempo in the 6th and 7th minutes as Mäkelä holds the rhythm back a bit to get a caressed sound out of the strings. The seeds of the dissolution of the waltz start in the 7th minute, with some ominous sounds starting to appear during the main waltz theme. At 10 minutes and 20 seconds, Mäkelä makes a smooth translation to the mildly threatening bassoons we heard at the beginning of the work, primordial forces at work. There's a big cymbal crash at just after the 11-minute mark as the waltz lumbers on now, trying to regain its footing. Mäkelä characterizes this so well, bringing the same sense of drama he brought to Symphonie Fantastique. Let's hear the end of the work with Mäkelä drawing out the harsher elements. I really enjoyed this interpretation. This is an excellent and dramatic performance of Symphonie Fantastique. Mäkelä sets rather quick tempos, and they all pay off as he injects a youthful energy into the work, one that serves it well. We also have to give a shout out to recording engineer Arne Axelberg and recording producer and editor Jorn Pedersen for the powerful sound they've captured on this recording. Mäkelä has great control over the orchestra and the overall arc of the work, a remarkable feat for someone his age. The same can be said for Ravel's La Valse, which we just heard. It's presented here with all of its sonic glory intact. Mäkelä plays this more for drama, and it works well. There are other recordings of Symphonie Fantastique that I don't want to stop listening to, but I'll have to revisit this one often as well. The entire album is a must-hear, especially for fans of Symphonie Fantastique.
It's been so long since I've listened to this work that I can't really compare it to other recordings directly.
Yeah.
But I really reconnected with Berlioz's music listening to this new recording after listening to so much classical music the past few years. Berlioz has a unique rhythmic and phrasing sense with really odd accents. He often accents the upbeats. Right. And his music is episodic rather than developmental. But any oddities in his kind of phrasal composition is offset and made really more beautiful by incredible orchestration. He was really a great orchestrator. Yeah. We're used to that in contemporary works, all those odd things, but it's still interesting to experience that set in a romantic setting and period like this. The performance is fabulous, as you pointed out, especially the fourth movement. I love the brass on this recording, and I like the way Mäkelä emphasizes certain elements in the performance. And the Ravel is dynamic as well. You captured some of the best points in the samples there. The recording's well balanced, and it has enough detail. It impresses with richness of sound and great impactful dynamics in the percussion and the brass. It's a really exciting recording to listen to.
All right, so our third album is a special birthday dedication to my brother Richard, because it's called L'Accordéoniste, Préludes, Valse, Envols, and it's played by Félicien Brut on the accordion. Now, it's just a coincidence that we happen to include an accordion work on the episode we're doing on Richard's birthday, but I just thought it was pretty funny that it would happen, because he's complained about the accordion in the past. And I want to say, I think the reason is because he's never been to Europe. If he went to Europe, he would start liking it. Anyway, this is on the Erato label, released on May 23rd. Now, Félicien Brut says in his note about the album that he has chosen to view this album as a kind of confessional, a secret he's whispering directly into our ears. He's telling us why he loves the accordion. My brother needs to hear this. For the program, he's chosen 15 pieces that he believes showcase some of the highly diverse personality traits of the accordion. They're organized in sets of 3 pieces, 5 sets each composing a prelude, a waltz, and a flight, or envol. 3 categories that he says do a pretty good job of encapsulating the fabulous history of the accordion. Now, the accordion is one of those instruments, like the guitar, that has its own repertoire that has nothing to do with the classical repertoire. It's sort of different. And I find that exciting because you get to hear a lot of new music. The 5 preludes on the album are all transcriptions. The waltz, Brut reminds us, was driven by the accordion, so there we are. We have another waltz album here. Waltzes were heard in taverns on the banks of the Marne to the dancing halls of the Rue de Lappe, and from the most illustrious music hall venues to the smoke-filled bars of jazz clubs, and from country dances in provincial towns to the big screens of movie theaters. It's very much a popular instrument. It has set people waltzing. The 5 waltzes on the album are all homages, a way that Brut acknowledges his roots and tells a handful of accordionists, past and present, how much he loves and admires them. Now, in fact, the waltzes are all, not all, but mostly musettes. Now, the musette is kind of like a hybrid. It's the sort of thing you hear on the streets of Paris to this day, really, when you see people busking with the accordion. So we'll hear a bit of that, and I'll say more about that when we come up to it. The flight compositions are all about hopes, dreams, and achievements. All 5 flight compositions are by accordionist composers, and they're all pretty unique sounding as well. They're not what you think of, really, when you hear the accordion. I should mention that Brut plays a chromatic accordion with buttons on both ends, so there's no keyboard on one end of this. I posted on YouTube about this, so you can see him play it in not such great sound. We get excellent sound on this recording, though. The buttons enable him to play with some impressive virtuosity. Okay, we start with a pretty famous work, Frédéric Chopin, Prelude in C minor, Opus 28, number 20. This is a bit of a surprise way to start the album, right? I was kind of like, oh, when I heard this. It's the prelude with the chords in it. You know, we'll remember once again, Barry Manilow gets another shout out on the podcast because he used this particular Chopin prelude as the opening of his song, Could It Be Magic? I really wish it wasn't associated with that song, though. I want to think of it as just the Chopin prelude. I have to say that the timbre of the accordion changes the character of this work completely, because there's no attack. Somehow the percussive quality of the piano adds a lot, and the dynamics that the piano is able to accomplish. Because when you play forte and then suddenly piano, there's something about the lack of sudden piano attack that softens the entire profile of the work. Anyway, let's hear a sample of this, because you got to get our ears accustomed to this instrument. Now, Brut has a lot of soul in his playing. There's a real emotion in there. He gets some beautiful pianissimo sounds out of the instrument toward the end, too. This sounds like an abbreviated version of the work, by the way. It's, I think it goes on for longer than this. There are more repeats or something. Track 2, Marcel Azzola. This would be the waltz, and Pascal Groff, arranged by Domi Emerin. This is called Double Scotch. It's the sort of track that reminds me of what we love about the accordion. It excels at lighter feelings and is ideal for jazzy pop songs of an earlier era, like this piece. This type of work is called the musette, which is a genre that blended French folk music, jazz, and dance music popular in the early 20th century. Marcel Azzola was a French accordionist who worked with French icons like Edith Piaf and Jacques Brel, and Pascal Groff was a bassist that collaborated with him. It's got such a French, carefree, wandering the streets of Paris feel to it that it's irresistible. I can't not sample this, so let's hear it.
That really breathes and has nice dynamics in the phrasing.
Right. And he's really like that throughout the album, too. He gives the work appealing rhythmic life. You can tell he loves playing the instrument. It's audible on this track. Track 3, Petri Makkonen. Born in 1967, he's a contemporary composer. The Flight Beyond the Time. This extends the technique we usually associate with the accordion, providing a light percussive effect at the beginning that I think is produced by the force of hitting the repeating key on the instrument. I had to see how this was done, so I found a performance on YouTube and posted it on our Facebook site so you can see it there. There's a staccato quarter note repeating set of chords and a rapidly repeating note making up the musical material. And the whole repeating rhythms, like going at different speeds, sort of reminds me of Steve Reich's technique. So all of this ends at 2 minutes and 15 seconds in, when the accordion takes on more of the tone of a church organ, given the lonely melody it plays. It's a very brief interlude, and the more percussive opening returns at 3 minutes and 16 seconds. This time we hear a vertiginous rising figure that leads to some fortissimo playing. The work is a bit in the American minimalist style, as I mentioned, with its repeating patterns, and it's also reminiscent of Bach in the movement of its harmony. Speaking of which, track 4, Johann Sebastian Bach's Prelude in F minor. So now we're on the second round of Prelude Waltz Flight. This is Prelude in F minor from the Well-Tempered Clavier Book 2, number 12. Bach's music seems able to withstand any kind of timbral change, and this prelude comes across very appealingly on this instrument. Excellent. I love it. Track 5, Jean Péronin. Improvisation by Joe Rossi, Reine de Musette. So this is another musette. This is a famous work in the musette genre. It starts with a moody introduction and then gets into some very active playing on the accordion. The piece itself is upbeat. Yeah, we really hear the jazz and dance hall pop song blend in that piece. I think, but can't confirm, that the entire piece is a transcription of Joe Rossi's improvisation on the piece. He was a virtuosic player, and as you can hear in the sample, this is a virtuosic performance. Track 6, this is the flight piece, Franck Angelis. He was French, born in 1962. Amalgame. It's a contemporary work that also starts staccato with some syncopated accents to add some spice. The melody fits in an appealing way. Really great sound, too. At around the 2 minute and 15 second mark, the work is given a contrasting melodic interlude played without syncopation. At 2 minutes and 48 seconds, the opening syncopations return. It's interesting that, despite sounding like a completely different work, the structural profile resembles Péronin's work that we heard on track 3, because it has a brief melodic interlude in the middle and lively rhythmic staccato figures at the ends. Okay, track 7 starts our third round of Prelude Waltz Flight with Johannes Brahms's Chorale Prelude Opus 122 number 5, Schmücke dich, o liebe Seele. I'm actually unfamiliar with this Brahms chorale prelude. It comes across as mournful, or at least contrite, and features a pretty straightforward accordion sound. The piece comes across intimately in this performance. Track 8, Domi Emorin, born 1975, and Félicien Brut, our accordionist on this recording. after a theme by Jean-Philippe Rameau called Bal Sauvage, or Savage Dance. Now, this would have been written in the Baroque era. It sounds like it's been adapted into a musette piece by its light, flowing melody, as opposed to the stiffer, steady style of Baroque works. It really sounds like a street melody in this guise. It's pretty interesting. That's how it ends. Track 9, André Astier, who lived 1923 to 1994, Fantastique in E minor. It's a pretty long work, clocking in at almost 7 minutes. It starts out in musette fashion with a somberly played introduction. The piece is pretty straightforward, sounding somber in its opening section, then switching at about the 3-minute mark to something more insistent. And I'm going to sample that more insistent part. After the 5-minute mark, we're squarely back into French street music. And I love the wistful feel. The ending section goes into a flight of the bumblebee-like virtuosic figure and is impressive to hear. Okay, with track 10, we're back to Preludes. This is the 4th round of the 5 that we're going to hear on this album. Nino Rota, composer of the Godfather theme, right? Yeah. Which is called Speak Softly Love. It's also known that way. The funny thing is, we associate that theme with the accordion because we hear it so often on the accordion, but in the film it's never played with the accordion. It's always an orchestra and a trumpet. The opening line has a bit of the solitary feel of the Godfather love theme here, and like that theme, it works well on the accordion. This piece wasn't written for the accordion either, but let's hear it. And we don't get the cadence. Wow. There's a brief B section that's a bit more upbeat, but the A section repeats. I like the ending chord here as well. Track 11, Jos Baselli, 1926 to 1982. This is arranged by Domi Emorin. It's called Impromptu. Baselli was a French accordionist and a key figure in French popular music, particularly for his compositions in the musette genre. We get a less carefree version of that here. There's some harmonic complexity at the beginning of this work, with thick chords underpinning the melody, which briefly breaks free at the end of the phrase. There's a virtuosic run just before the 2nd minute, and I'm going to sample just after that. Yeah, that whole sound just brings me right back to Paris. It's just fantastic. The piece ends on a livelier note than we just heard. Track 12, John Gart, who lived 1905 to 1989. Scherzo. Gart was Russian. He immigrated to the U.S. in the 1930s. He was composer of popular and light music, and this particular work fits the bill. This starts with a surprisingly dark chord. At the 50-second mark, a soft, slow melody suddenly breaks into some fleet figuration, showing some impressive virtuosity from Brut, which we've heard at various points on the album. I love those bass notes at the end of the phrase. Really funny. A little bit of a comic effect there. Track 13, Isaac Albanese. Man, you would never think to see him on an album of accordion music. This is arranged by Friedrich Lipps. It's called Prelude, or also known as Asturias, Leyenda, which is a legend, from Chant d'Espagne, opus 232. Boy, Albanese wrote a lot of works in his life. Here the accordion begins by imitating a rapidly strummed guitar string, and while it doesn't sound like that, it does sound impressive. The quick tempo and dance rhythm of the piece continues, well maintained by Brut throughout. He does the subtle accelerandos of a Spanish dance well. At 1 minute and 30 seconds, there's a slow, austere section. Sections change rapidly in this work, alternating between slow and fast. And it goes on from there. Track 14, Richard Galliano. Born in 1950, he's a contemporary composer. La Valse à Margot. Let's savor this, the last Musette-style work we'll hear on the album. It's a contemporary one, but starts with the light, popular air of other famous works in the Musette genre, and that feel comes in and out during the piece. Being that it's a contemporary work, some opportunity for virtuosity is included, which Brut dispatches brilliantly. I just wanted to get that slower section in there at the end so that you can hear how it changes from fast and virtuosic to slow and somber. The theme is broken down into a more abstract style at around 2 minutes and 30 seconds, but often will rhythmically burst back in. There's some impressive harmony playing at points on the theme. The work acts as a sort of rondo with the opening theme constantly returning. And track 15, Evgeny Derbenko, a contemporary composer. Chorale Prelude in F minor. This almost fades in with a funereal sound. It continues like this as the title suggests. The piece is lightly melodic, but is heavily harmony-driven. It ends the album on a rather somber note, which is fine. It's an attractive piece, but I feel like this mostly energetic album should have ended with more of a bang. Like the Brahms chorale prelude, this sounds pretty churchy. Well, this album was quite a discovery. It turns out that accordionists, like classical guitarists, have their own niche in the composers that write for their instrument. Félicien Brut brings a high level of virtuosity to his instrument, yet he plays with consummate musicality as well. His idea of putting together a program in the manner of 5 3-movement suites works well and ensures that the listener can continue to the end. I was hooked on this recording throughout. I personally love the sound of the accordion, and in pieces like Makonen's The Flight Beyond the Time and Angelis's Amalgam, Brut demonstrates some unfamiliar approaches that can be taken to the accordion. The album is by turns adventurous, lighthearted, and brings some weight at points. The program comes across as highly original and inventive, and as a result, it's a fascinating listen. I'd urge you to hear it.
Fast fingers and fun phrasing. The accordion in Brut's hands sounds alive with breath to me. It was interesting hearing familiar material like the Chopin work in a new way on accordion.
Yeah.
And the Bach work actually made me want to hear Bach organ pieces arranged for accordion too. I wonder what that would sound like with all the voices moving. I bet it would be really charming with the reeds.
I wonder if it's possible, though. You know, you have to push all those buttons.
Yeah, you'd have to have some arrangement made, but it would be intriguing. I also enjoyed the Nino Rota piece here. I've always liked his classical music, and the interesting harmonic movement is odd but appealing. And then in the Astier, the movement of the multiple lines was fun to follow. And all that mixed in, as you mentioned, the program has a lot of variety with new approaches to other material. Yeah, the playing is virtuosic, enthusiastic, and very musical. And I'd like to hear this accordion approach to other works so that I can experience them in a new way. I find that really mind-opening.
Yeah, I like that too, when you hear kind of, pieces that reinvent the instrument a bit.
And speaking of hearing things in a new way, we've got some surprises on the jazz half of the program for this episode.
We sure do. I'm still surprised.
We've enjoyed a few classically inspired jazz recordings on adult music, particularly in 2023. First, Sati, A Time Remembered. That was on O-Tone Records by bassist Casper van Meel. And that was a great sextet adaptation of Sati's music. We liked that so much it made our favorites of the year list. And shortly after that, we also heard Bizet, Carmen in Jazz. That was on Blue Room Records by saxophonist John Ellis Quartet. And that was a lot of fun as well. So we know that classical music can be used as a basis for some really happening and interesting jazz. And we're going to get some of that tonight on our first recording, Tony's Dream.
Hey, Tony.
Hey, Tony. What Tony are we talking about?
We're talking about a certain Tony called Antonio.
Yeah, Vivaldi.
Right.
And this is now out on Adhyâropa Records. It came out May 30th by the Melodrum Trio. And thanks to Joe Brent at Adhyâropa and also to the pianist here, Salvatore Spano, for sending me some extra info.
Not enough.
Not quite enough for us to not have to play musical detective and not be so good at it.
Well, it's hard to do in this case because they're not using all the Vivaldi hits on this album. Not only that, Vivaldi's catalog is, he wrote maybe 500 plus concertos, and then there are operas and songs. There's no way you could dig through all that and find these themes. Anyway.
So here's the concept. The album notes say, quote, "How might Antonio Vivaldi's visionary artistic genius have thrived in the chaotic, exhilarating world of early 20th century America? What impact could his unique personality have had on a century defined by contradictions and the absence of a prevailing artistic language? One possible answer unfolds through this imaginative journey where Vivaldi's music meets the sounds of jazz, blues, American song, and Broadway theater. This ironic and dreamlike exploration through time and space reveals the remarkable adaptability and modern resonance of Vivaldi's compositions." Intrigued? Well, I was. That's why I chose this recording.
I heard this several times, in fact.
The Melodrum Trio is made up of Salvatore Spano on piano, Salvatore Martana on bass, and Francesco Brancato on drums. This was recorded by Marty Jane Robertson at Jane Studio in Cagliari, Sardinia, and then mixed and mastered at Studio della Giraffa, also located in Cagliari. Now, no recording date was in the information, and searching in Italian, it seems that this recording was made some years back, but as far as I can tell, it was never made available on streaming. So even though we generally feature recent recordings, I thought it would be something nice to include as a bridge between classical and jazz music, and it's newly out. Now Adhyâropa has put it out, so I don't think anyone's heard it before.
It's a recent release, I guess you could say.
The notes do tell us that all the songs were developed, adapted, and arranged by Salvatore Spano and Francesco Brancato. They drew inspiration from public domain musical themes and fragments featured in Antonio Vivaldi's works, including The Trial of Harmony and Invention Opus 8.
That's where the Four Seasons comes from.
There's a lot of movements in there. L'Estro Armonico, Opus 3.
Yeah, one of my favorite sets, by the way, so if you want to discover some new Vivaldi, go for Opus 3.
Tuzone, RV 736, Madness, Opus 1, and Gloria, RV 589. And that's all we get. No specifics on which tunes feature what themes. And I think we got a couple of them anyway.
Yeah, we got two, I think, right? Two or maybe three.
Looking through the archives, we've discussed 5 Vivaldi recordings in the classical part of the program, and 3 of them have been recordings of the Four Seasons in various versions.
Well, 2 of them were this year.
Right. Now, I'm not an expert on Vivaldi's other compositions to be able to identify all the themes, but everyone will know where we start out here with track 1, Spring in Manhattan. And this is from the Violin Concerto in E major. You'll get it right away. Opus 8, number 1, RV 269, La Primavera. And this is the first movement. And this is done in a wonderfully playful adaptation. There's a 12-measure intro of an alternating chord vamp idea. You'll recognize the melody right away. The sections are in a kind of AABBA form, with some of the sections stretched to 9 measures, building extra anticipation. Spano's trills are fun, and Brancato injects some New Orleans-style flair into his drumming. The final melody section with descending piano figures leads to a return to the vamp to set up Spano for improvisations. Let's hear it get started. And back to the vamp there to get him set up to start improvisations. Let's jump back in to hear some of his ideas once he's on a roll. It's really lively with lots of bluesy ideas. So much fun right away. And once more through the famous melody wraps up the first track. Track 2 is Riverboat Suite Andante Mosso. And I picked this one up. It's from L'Estro Armonico, Opus 3, Concerto for 4 violins in E minor, number 4. This is movement 1, Andante. I had a recording of this, and I know I remembered it from there, so it was easy to find and confirm.
That's pretty amazing, because I did sort of recognize the theme, but I was like, I have no idea where this is from, so I'm amazed that you even pulled that out. By the way, anyone wanting to hear L'Estro Armonico, I will recommend the Rachel Podger and Fabio Biondi recordings.
Oh yeah, those are great. The arrangement here has some halting phrasing that's neat and builds up into a climax of tremolos. Let's check it out. And the theme repeats from there to a different ending and some Latin beat excitement from Brancato that simmers down for improvisations from Spano. He gets nice punctuations from Brancato's drums, and then Brancato gets a drum solo that features nice tom tones. Let's hear some of that. It down to be very soft to a suspenseful pause before piano and bass are back for a final melody segment. It's a classy arrangement. Track 3 is Riverboat Suite Calmo. Rubato, rippling piano, bowed bass, and drum fills make a dreamy intro to this tune that transforms into a sensitive and very slow jazz ballad. I don't know where the melody is from, but at this tempo, the 12-measure melody phrase seems to be just about right in length. Let's hear it get started. Hannah takes a bass solo on this tune, starting out with what sounds to me like a direct quote from Ray Evans and Jay Livingston's Never Let Me Go, a jazz fragment I could identify right away in a Vivaldi melody that I can't. Let's take a listen. Nicely warm and melodic. Spano follows from there with a solo. The tune ends with a rippling ending matching the opening idea. Track 4 is Riverboat Suite Ostinato. This starts with rhythmic piano chords that get joined by a bass ostinato on the 8-measure intro. It's in 5/4 time. The melody develops over 30 measures with interesting harmonic twists. Let's check it out. Let's hear some of Spano's improvised ideas on this one too. Chiming sounds there. Brancato gets to do some work on here too, again decrescendoing the drums into a restart of the piano melody that starts out solo and builds up to a big finish as bass and drums join in. Track 5, Mardi Gras Cheat. This takes a while to get counted off, and then a rolling and rumbling piano start leads to a happy theme over a New Orleans-style beat. It reminds me in sort of mood of Vince Guaraldi.
I got that too. Yeah, it's funny you say that, yeah.
Oh, really? Let's check it out. Now it rolls and rumbles again into a bluesy and snappy solo from Spano. Let's hear some of that as well. To stop the sample. It's so much fun. I like the left-hand ideas and bass lines there along the way too. Another rumbling transition leads to a bass solo from Maltana. They do some tremolo building phrase exchanges with Brancato's drums before getting back to the melody and a playful ending. Track 6 is the title track, Tony's Dream, and Tony's got the blues on this short track. And that's it. Just a solo piano piece. I'm sure that would be hard to identify what inspired that. Track 7 is Crazy About That, and this is the one Mike and I think sounds like it could be La Folia, Opus 1, number 12.
Yeah, and part of that's because of the title. You know, you have the word crazy in the title, and folia is kind of like a craziness, I guess.
Although it's transformed, I think you'll recognize the shape of the melody. An interesting drum beat leads to chasing unison bass and piano lines, and then a light piano melody line featuring triplets and fun phrasing. Spano's improvisations here are a lot of fun, including a little trip to Cuba on the way, so let's check that out. Brancato gets an extended drum solo with interesting tom tones on this one next, before they get back to the melody, and it ends with the chasing lines from the intro.
I want to say the piano solo on that had like that figure kind of sounded a bit like a Vivaldi violin solo, so I think he's kind of imitating the style a bit.
Yeah, the rhythmic aspects of it. And track 8 is Thanksgiving, the final track. I'm not sure if that's a key to where this comes from. Lush and rubato solo piano for the start of this tune. Whatever Vivaldi idea they've worked with, it comes out sounding like it was made for a jazz ballad. Bass and drums join in midway with nice ringing tone from Maltana. Let's hear how the tune and album ends up. It's certainly an enjoyable recording. Some of the Vivaldi melodies are instantly familiar and fairly straightforward. As the recording goes along, though, ideas have been more creatively transformed, and at least we couldn't identify a lot of them. Overall, I like the sense of rhythmic playfulness that's really brought out by Brancato's drumming. Lots of different rhythmic styles and drum tones. Spano's harmonization is creative, and he injects bluesiness and Latin ideas in unexpected spots with solos that have fine development. Maltana has spots to stand out on the bass melodically, and his big tone and grooves lock in nicely. The sponge of jazz can absorb the melodic liquid from any genre, and the musicianship of the Melodrum trio transforms Vivaldi into ideas that sometimes surprise you and other times make you think, of course, that fits perfectly. And I'm sure it would make Tony smile.
Another thing that they did that was inspired by Vivaldi is have the Riverboat Suite be in 3 movements, like a 3-movement Vivaldi concerto. That's really his invention. It's funny, too, but despite all the melodies being by Vivaldi or inspired by Vivaldi, the piano playing comes across as close to Vince Guaraldi at more than one point, in its lightness anyway. I mean, I heard that during track 7, Crazy About That, and you mentioned it in Mardi Gras Cheat, which I also kind of sensed it in. Salvatore Spano has a romantic-era approach to the piano, especially in openings like we heard for Thanksgiving, the final track, but quickly falls into jazz harmony afterwards. It's funny that there's nothing Baroque about this album beyond the actual Vivaldi melodies used. Spano's pretty good at integrating the two approaches, making them sound like they fit together with those blue notes thrown in the romantic figuration. So yeah, he's more romantic than Baroque in his playing. It's kind of funny. He's using the pedal and all those swirling arpeggios too, at times. Track 6, Mardi Gras Cheat, made me smile while listening. I thought it was uplifting and clever. I actually thought the entire album was clever and was a very welcome listen. It's an interesting project, and the title, Tony's Dream, is very much in keeping with adult music's mission purpose, to remove some of the highfalutin nature of classical and jazz music commentary and make it accessible to everyone.
Yeah. Hopefully this crosses the divide of genres and just makes great music that everyone loves. All right, next we've got a jazz concept album from Sweden. And the bassist of this group, Håkan Trygger, contacted us last year about their previous album, Future, which at the time was only out on vinyl. But he told me that they had another one coming out this year, so I asked him to get in touch again. And the previous release that was on vinyl at the time, Future, came out on streaming platforms in May. So now you can check that one out too. And we've got the new one here, which is called Limbokolia, from the Coco Chatru Quartet. It's on Trygger Music, and it came out June 6th. Now, the Coco Chatru Quartet described their music as contemporary with roots in the American jazz tradition and a heavy dose of Swedish nostalgia. The group gets its name from the legendary Swedish adventurer, inventor, and actress Coco Chatru that came to the attention of the band after discovering a vast collection of her letters. The stories contained within these letters are nothing but extraordinary. I'm reading from the notes here. Expeditions in the deep seas, roulette playing with thugs in skyscrapers, and strange tea parties beneath the metropolis. The record Limbokolia was inspired by a tale told to the band by an alleged former companion, now very old, of Coco Chatru. In her youth, she was part of Coco Chatru's entourage in Madrid. By coincidence, they became acquainted with the curious Madrid icon El Hombre de Zinc, the man of zinc, who spoke of a mysterious faraway place or zone called Limbokolia. In the lair of the man of zinc, they found a map leading to Limbokolia and embarked on a remarkable journey. The songs of the album Limbokolia are named after different parts of the journey. Are you intrigued?
I'm interested, I guess. I'm going to guess that we're going to miss the entire Swedish nostalgia part of this album.
It'll probably go over our heads, but the music here is really great.
Yeah, I thought so too.
In the quartet here, we've got Linus Kose on alto saxophone, Charlie Mamber on baritone saxophone, Håkan Trygger on bass, and Daniel Kose on drums and vibraphone. This was recorded at the Stockholm Concert Hall, November 23rd and 24th, 2024, recording, mixing, and mastering by Linus Kose. I'm going to do my best with the Swedish titles.
What happens if you hear like a great album, and the titles are all Swedish, and you go to your friends and say, I want you to hear this track. I don't know what it's called, though.
And luckily, Håkan Trygger sent us notes that guide us through this adventure in music here, so I'm going to share them with you before each track. Track 1 is called Tuggummi Solo Beton, and that means chewing gum, sunlight, and concrete. It's an image of their carefree existence in Madrid, the notes say, and a carefree and fun harmonized sax melody it is. It's a 16-measure construction over snappy bass from Håkan Trygger. I like the little break in the 9th measure with a drum fill. Charlie Malmberg is up first on the big bari sax for a solo. Let's hear things get going. Trygger gets a bass solo next, and then Kose on alto. Let's check out some of his solo too. back to the melody from there to finish things up. Track 2 is Sinkmannens Skafferi, and this is also by Håkan Trygger. The Attic of the Man of Zinc, which the notes say is the place where they found and stole the map. This starts with some mysterious sounds and percussion before the bass and swooping rubato sax lines come in. Let's hear it. I hear some castanets in there. I guess they're in Madrid after all in the story. The playfulness carries on until Trygger gets a cool 5/4 ostinato going to bring in the saxes on a weaving line and harmonized melody. It follows the form of a 12-bar minor blues, and then Charlie Malmberg is off on a solo. Let's jump back in from where the bass ostinato starts. His bari sax tone has a nice combination of gruff and breathiness that's enjoyable. Kose has a alto sax solo on this one too, and then Daniel Kose gets to work up the drums a bit and keep the extra percussion sounds going over the bass for a bit before they get back to the melody and a stretched ending to recall the opening. Track 3 is SPIF. This is by Linus Kose. It stands for Safe Passage Internazionale de Falconetti, which is the name of the steamship they traveled aboard. Daniel Kose brings in the vibes for this one and makes a ringing intro that gets bowed bass lines added. Let's hear that into the start of a soft alto sax melody from Linus Kose. Soft sax lines work to improvisations, Charlie Malmberg joins in later with some intersecting lines on the bari sax. Let's come back in from there. Pretty and atmospheric, a long-held sax note ends the tune. Track 4 by Håkan Trygger is Ormen med gigget, the snake with the gig. It's named after the steamship's captain, who the notes say was a villain who sunk the vessel during a storm. A little New Orleans flavor from Daniel Kosse's drums. Starting from the intro on this one, there's a repeating 12-measure sax melody with fun harmonization. The last measure is left for drum fills, and then Charlie Malmberg is off on a bari sax solo. Linus Kosse solos on this as well. Let's hear Daniel Kosse have some fun on the drums a little bit further on. Back to the melody that tricks you into thinking it's going to repeat before the ending. Track 5, a tune by Charlie Malmberg, Kletterträd, a tree for climbing. This was one of the enigmatic objects marked on the stolen map, a tree in the form of a labyrinth. There's a harmonized 4-measure sax intro, and then Linus Kosse's sweet-toned alto takes the melody that breaks time with a couple of pauses getting into the next phrase. Charlie Malmberg weaves in, and the two have nice interplay on the evolving melody lines that go on. two saxes trade off solo phrases on this one. Let's hear a little bit of their improvisations. Eventually weave it back into a final melody section. Track 6 is a tune by Håkan Trygger, Cikadan og Turturduvan. The cicada and the turtle dove, which are the gatekeepers that travelers to Limbokolia must pass in order to reach the forbidden amusement park. Soft bass pulses joined by cymbals bloom into a louder beat. Sax squawks that might be dove calls get Momber going on improvised bari sax lines, and Linus Kose joins in, and the two firm up on harmonized melody lines over chugging walking bass. Let's hear it get started. Kose has a free-flying alto solo, and then Trygger has a bass solo that gets sax backing lines that get to a shorter final melody section to end it. Track 7 is by Daniel Kose. It's called Waterslide, and that's a waterslide that leads to a secret basement where a chaotic movie is being recorded. A short intro section that feels like slow 6/8 sax phrases starting from a bass note leads to a gentle 4/4 rock groove in the bass and drums under an appealing harmonized sax melody. The first section repeats, and the final short section builds syncopated anticipation into a solo from Kose. Really nice melody. Both saxes get solos with a little transition phrase in between from the melody. Let's hear a little bit of each of them. Final melody section with phrase repeats finishes it up. Track 8 is by Håkan Trygger called Trubbel i Källaren, which means Big Trouble in the Basement. This one has an 8-measure intro with syncopated sax and bass figures and a break before a bari sax and bass line gets going with a bluesy 20-measure progression. Kose joins in the final phrase and adds a new line for another time around. Let's check it out. Is off on a solo from there, followed by Malmberg. Let's hear Trygger's funky bass solo on this tune. Daniel Kose gets to work up the drums with the saxes adding rising tense lines into a final run through the melody and an outro like the opening. And the recording ends up with track 9 by Linus Kose, Coco's Bolero, and that works into Melancholia by the great Duke Ellington. And the notes say it depicts the vast prairie that can only be crossed with a bolero in 4/4. Then, beyond the horizon, beyond the rainbow, lies Limbokolia, the place where everyone we long for awaits us. The theme song for that magical place, the only track not composed by the band members, is a tune called Melancholia, written by one of the citizens of Limbokolia. So apparently, Ellington resides in spirit in the Promised Land. Daniel Kose gets a bolero beat started that is so soft you probably won't be able to hear it unless you turn up the volume. The saxes have an extremely quiet melody together. I'll join in where they get started a few seconds into the tune. Kose continues on for a solo, getting soft backing from Malmberg, who then takes over. They join back into the melody, more forceful now as the bolero beat gets stronger and stronger. Let's hear the climax of that, which is the whole journey and album climax into a gong that rings out. Kose getting back to the vibes there for lush ringing under Malmberg's Ellington melody, and it continues on to a soft ending. Well, that was a fun journey. The mostly chordless arrangements have lots of space, but Håkan Trygger's bass playing outlines all of the harmonies nicely, and he has a couple excellent bass solos as well. The sax melodies are all cleverly harmonized, filling things out nicely, and the contrast of Linus Kose's alto sax and Charlie Malmberg's bari sax is appealing. Both have great tone and fine solos that explore the musical terrain. Daniel Kose's drums are just right in the mix, working from sensitive to exciting, depending on the scene over a variety of rhythmic feels from swing to Latin to straight rock feels. And the two tunes with vibes add a nice lush contrast. It's an easy-to-listen-to program, but never lacking in excitement. You'll pick up some West Coast jazz vibes as well, a la Jerry Mulligan's cordless contrapuntal group improvisation recordings with Chet Baker. So get your ticket to Limbokolia.
I have to say I really enjoyed that whole program note that you put out. It's pretty imaginative. A pretty interesting driving force behind this album. I got to tell you, right away, off the top, any band with a baritone sax in it is a friend of mine. Charlie Malmberg on baritone sax gets a lot of time on the album, and he was good to hear throughout, playing with good tone and not afraid to get into the low end of the instrument, which I really appreciate. That's what listeners like me come to the baritone sax for. And having a baritone and alto sax makes for some good contrast as well. There's a considerable space between them. So it's a good upfront recording on all of the instruments. Bassist Håkan Trygger is rhythmic and direct in his solos, getting right to the point, which I really liked. And Daniel Kose on drums sets some moods as well, and even has the vibraphone as a secret weapon to mellow us out. It's an enjoyable album, sometimes upbeat, sometimes mysterious, and it's just a little different from what you generally hear, and I really liked that.
Yeah, and if you're a vinyl collector, the vinyl sleeve also includes Limbokolia, the board game, an accompanying game that takes the players on an adventurous journey to reach Limbokolia. The notes say it can only be played while listening to the entire album. And don't worry, the board game is in English.
Well, there's a lot of thought went into this.
Pretty neat.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
All right, and speaking of West Coast vibes, that's going to take us to our final album called West Coast Echoes. This came out on Bandstand Presents, label by Josh Nelson and Kevin Vanden Elzen on June 6th. Pianist and composer Josh Nelson has performed and recorded with big names in jazz, including George Mraz, Jeff Hamilton, Eddie Daniels, Sin Eeg, a vocalist we really like, Benny Golson, and Louis Nash, just to pick a few of my favorites from his list. He's played on numerous recordings, on films and television shows as well. As a leader, his debut was Anticipation in 2004 and then Let It Go in 2007. His other recordings are I Hear a Rhapsody in 2009 and 2011's Discoveries, which sounds interesting. It introduced a pairing of classic science fiction film footage with new compositions for a brass and wind ensemble. Now, this recording comes out of West Coast Jazz Hour, a collaborative podcast created by Josh Nelson and the drummer on the recording, Kevin Van den Elzen, as a way to stay connected through jazz. It sounds like it was COVID-inspired, just like the start of our podcast. Josh and Kevin brought West Coast Jazz Hour to life on stage with a quintet and later expanded their vision to a big band and trio. And here we've got a trio bass expanding to a quintet with horns on 3 tracks. And thanks to Josh Nelson for sending me the liner notes to the album. So the band makeup here is Josh Nelson on piano, Kevin Van den Elzen on drums, Eric Sittner on bass, and we've got horns on 3 tracks, Bob Shepard on tenor sax and Ron Stout on trumpet. The session engineers were Tally Sherwood and Harriet Tem, mixing mastering engineer Max Sink, and this was recorded at Tritone Studio in Los Angeles, California on February 17th, 2024. We've got a really interesting program of music here. We're going to start out with a Nelson original called Griffith Park Promenade, or Promenade if you prefer. The horns are in for this one, harmonizing on an easy-flowing 16-measure melody that repeats. Listen for the neat bass movement underneath and some tasty piano fills from Nelson. Stout's off on a trumpet solo from there. We'll check out one of his solos later on. Let's come back in and hear some of Bob Shepard's tenor solo on this one. Nelson follows with an interesting piano solo, stretching the time feel as the pressing swing beat falls away for the start. He works it back rhythmically with playful figures jumping up the keyboard, finishing up with a Charlie Parker quote jazz fans will recognize. The horns are back with a final melody section that works to a slowed ending with some piano decorations from Nelson. Track 2 is a Cal Tjader tune, Liz Ann, and you can find this on his recording Cal Tjader Stan Getz Sextet from 1958. Nelson makes a sparkling and trickling piano intro over lightly ringing bass from Sittner before setting up the waltz feel for Tjader's melody. It's very classy sounding. Let's check it out. And let's come back in to hear some of his fleet improvisations on this one as well. Sittner follows with a bass solo that reaches way up high with melodic ideas, and Nilsson waltzes it through a final melody section to a pretty ending. Track 3, The King Swings by John Williams. Yes, that John Williams, the famous film composer, and also classical music as well. In the old days, sometimes he was credited as Johnny Williams. This is the theme to a CBS detective show called Checkmate, based in San Francisco, that ran from 1960 to 1962. The soundtrack came out for it in 1960, and it was re-released in 2006, and you can find it on streaming services now. Van den Elzen gets it started with the hi-hat, and a bass and left-hand piano line evoking detective mystery comes in. Syncopated horn figures come on top. The structure is like an AABAC pattern. It gets really swinging on the B part, and then the final section builds suspense with horn hits over drums. It's all pretty cool. Let's check it out. Shepard's off on a tenor solo from there. Let's check out Ron Stout's trumpet solo on this one. Nice agility and ideas there. Van den Elzen gets a drum solo next. The horns are back with a new section of fun lines into the opening melody that ends suddenly on the syncopated figures. Track 4 is Chinatown, also known as the love theme from Chinatown from the 1974 movie with Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway. It was composed by Jerry Goldsmith and creatively arranged here by Josh Nelson. The wash of sound at the start of the original tune is transformed to ripples of piano here by Nelson, and if you know the movie, you might recognize the theme as it was played on trumpet, but that's handled by Sittner's bass here, and it really sounds great. It's really lovely shadowing around the bass figures with those piano trickles there. I really like that. Let's hear some of Sittner's bass improvisations on here. Great tone and sense of pitch there. Nelson shows off his light touch and smooth articulation on his piano solo here. He takes the final melody section on piano to a final rippling bass line from Sittner. Lovely, gentle playing on this track. Track 5 is Diablo's Dance, a tune from West Coast trumpet great Shorty Rogers from his 1953 recording on RCA, Shorty Rogers and His Giants. This is a fun rhythmic tune. There's an 8-measure alternating chord rhythmic intro. The piano melody features staccato repeating notes. It's in an AABA shape. The A sections are 18 measures, ending with 2 measures of the intro vamp idea. Nelson takes it up an octave on the repeat. Let's hear it. Into the final A section from there that sticks on the vamp for 2 more measures. Let's come back in to hear the playful start of Nelson's piano solo on this one. unpredictable and exciting, and Van den Elzen gets a solo with bass and piano punctuation in spots around the form. I really want to get one of his drum solos in here somewhere, so let's listen to a little bit of that as well. And the opening vamp builds it up to a final time through the melody starting from the B section and a fun ending. Track 6 is Birds of Paradise. This is by pianist and composer Mike Wofford from his 1969 recording Summer Night. Wofford was mostly known as a sideman. He played at the famous Lighthouse Club with musicians like James Moody, Shelley Mann, and Shorty Rogers, and he later played with Zoot Sims, Joe Pass, Kenny Burrell, Barney Kessel, and Bud Shank. Rubato and lush start to this pretty ballad, more classy piano ideas. Let's check it out. It takes on an easy sense of motion. Sittner has a charming bass solo on this one too. Let's hear a bit more of Nelson's smooth touch on this tune. Great running lines. This was a pretty tune to revive and include on this recording. And the recording finishes up with a tune by Terry Gibbs, Townhouse 3. This is not on the vinyl release of the recording. This was a song recorded in 1978, but apparently not released at the time. It's on Terry Gibbs' Dream Sextet Live 4 a.m. that included Conte Condoli on trumpet and Bob Cooper on sax. This was released by Mons Records in 2022, if you want to listen to it. We heard this tune before on Songs from My Father, recorded by Jerry Gibbs, Terry Gibbs' son, way back in episode 37, Mike.
I remember that record.
Yeah, that was a fun recording. Here, Van den Elzen gets it going with a fast samba groove. Sittner adds that heartbeat pulse on the bass under the 36-measure horn melody that keeps developing. And don't miss Nelson's piano fills underneath. Shepard getting going on a solo there. Stout follows him on trumpet, and Sittner has a really awesome bass solo on this one. So let's hear one more from him as our last sample. Go through the melody again, and it gets extended into a vamp where Van den Elzen gets to work up the energy to a big finish. And that's the recording. West Coast jazz of the 50s and 60s always puts me in a good mood, and so does this recording. First of all, the program is great with tunes from West Coast jazz giants Cal Tjader, Shorty Rogers, and Terry Gibbs. It goes deeper still with a classic movie theme, a John Williams detective show theme, and a tune from West Coast pianist Mike Wolford. Josh Nelson rounds out the program with an original that fits right in with the rest of the mood. It's a mix of swinging fun, sensitive ballads, detective danger, and even samba. Nelson's solos and accompaniment show off great technique, but more importantly, great taste and playful creativity. Van den Elzen drives everything with a lot of energy on the drums and has a couple of nice solo spots, and Sittner's bass has a great tone and his solos are really enjoyable. Bob Shepard and Ron Stout elevate the energy, adding horns to 3 tunes with fun melody lines and enthusiastic solos. Some good news for a change from California with this recording.
Oh yeah, this is by turns a breezy and a gentle album, and I like West Coast jazz too. And also I want to say what an appropriate thing to have on the podcast after we heard of the passing of Brian Wilson, who's also associated with Southern California. On the gentler side, I loved Liz Ann with its gliding 6/8 rhythm and light touch. I liked Eric Sittner's sensitive tone and phrasing in the thematic bass part on Chinatown and Birds of Paradise. It's funny because the album is credited to Josh Nelson and Kevin van der Elzen, yet I thought Siffner was the standout player on the album. He phrased sensitively and with a full tone that was pleasing to listen to. I have to say I did enjoy Josh Nelson's ideas, particularly his shimmering lines in Chinatown and his equally shimmering solo in Birds of Paradise. It's a pretty straightforward West Coast style jazz album with very satisfying playing.
Yeah, I'm pretty intrigued that these guys got started through a podcast. Now they've expanded to a big band too. I hope that gets a recording put out. I'd like to hear that as well. Yeah, definitely keep the music coming, guys. And that's it for episode 216, an interesting program of music as always. Once again, thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo, and happy birthday, Rich.
Yeah, happy birthday, Richard.
And we've got a menu lined up for next week's episode 217 already as well. So what's on the classical side of the program, Mike?
Okay, I've been sitting on this C.P.E. Bach recording, Sonatas for Violin and Harpsichord by Rio Terracado on violin and Fabio Bonizzoni on harpsichord. This is on the Challenge Classics label, so we're going to get to hear that, one of our favorite composers that really drew me and Russ together long ago. Next, we have a recording. We haven't heard the harp in a while, so there's a harp album that came out of music by Marcel Tournier, who was a harpist composer himself, called Image, homage à Marcel Tournier, and this is by Emmanuel Cesson on the Alpha label. I can't get away from the Alpha label. They just put out too many good records. And then finally, an album called Ellis Island by the pianist Julia Hamos. This is sort of like her journey from Hungary or her Hungarian culture to America, where she is now. She's in the United States. And I talked to her a little bit on over email, and she really wanted to talk about this album, but it was a little too last minute. We're kind of at crunch time in our day jobs. But this looks like an interesting program, and I hope we're going to get enough from the booklet notes that she sent me. So thank you to Julia for sending that, and I'm looking forward to hearing this album too. It's got a pretty interesting track list.
Yeah, it looks interesting. All right, over on the jazz side, I guess we can say next week will be kind of by request. We get contacted by record labels and we get contacted by publicity agents and all sorts of people, but sometimes we get contacted directly by musicians as well. So we're going to have a couple albums where musicians got in touch with us and said, would you talk about our music? And certainly this time we will. We're going to start out with a piano trio by pianist Ben Tweet. It's called Life Cycle. That's just come out on the 13th of June. And then we're going to go over to AMA Records, Antonio Martino's label, and he just let me know this was his next release coming out. It's the first live recording that his record label's putting out. So I thought we'd check that out too. It's a cordless sax trio, but the leader is the drummer who's also done most of the composing here. That's the Bastian Men's trio with everything in between. And that came out on the 13th as well. And then we're going to check out a recording from pianist Ramiro Zayas called Collector. And this recording is out on Bandcamp only right now, and it'll reach streaming sometime in the near future. And this is a drumless group. And we've got trumpet, trombone, tenor sax, and bass clarinet in the mix on the horns. So it's going to be something a little bit different. So it'll be an interesting program in jazz next week. All right, that's going to wrap it up for episode 217. Any final thoughts, Mike, before we say goodnight?
Well, I know my brother is too shy to say thank you for getting him into the accordion. So I'll just say, you're welcome, Rich.
Yeah, maybe we can send him that recording of all of the holiday favorite tunes sometime.
I think that would end his love of the accordion. I think that would end any effort that I'm making to get him into the accordion immediately.
Anyway, we'll have lots of new music to check out for next week. All of these recordings, except for the final one, are available on streaming, and we'll have them up on our Deezer playlist. And that'll be posted a few hours after this episode is published. We'll have a link to it from our Facebook page as well. So we'll be back again next week. You can get started listening to those albums along with us. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.